Can you hear me in the back now? It's an honor to be here with you. I was a little daunted when I accepted the invitation to come to the Big Apple because I'm just a simple country lawyer from Detroit. So if in the diplomat room I speak a bit undiplomatically, please forgive me. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, President Harry Truman confronted two momentous challenges: the commencement of the Cold War with the Soviet Union and the struggle to create a Jewish state in Palestine. In his blunt, son-of-the-middle-border manner, Truman enunciated the eponymous doctrine he would apply to these and all international challenges during his March 12, 1947 address to a joint session of Congress. Quote, "I believe that it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. I believe that we must assist free peoples to work out their own destinies in their own way. I believe that our help should be primarily through economic and financial aid, which is essential to economic stability and orderly political processes. One way of life is based upon the will of the majority and is distinguished by free institutions, representative government, free elections, guarantees of individual liberty, freedom of speech and religion, and freedom from political oppression. The second way of life is based upon the will of a minority forcibly opposed upon the majority. It relies upon terror and oppression, a controlled press and radio-fixed elections, and the suppression of personal freedoms. The seeds of totalitarian regimes are nurtured by misery and want. They spread and grow in the evil soil of poverty and strife. They reach their full growth when the hope of a people for a better life has died. We must keep that hope alive." He concluded with, "The free peoples of the world look to us for support in maintaining their freedoms. If we falter in our leadership, we may endanger the peace of the world, and we shall surely endanger the welfare of our own nation." End quote. Regarding the Soviet Union, in the face of experts' arguments, Stalin's imperialist dictatorship should be psychologically understood and indulged to purchase an illusory peace, Truman morally comprehended this evil empire's threat to the United States and the free world. Through the United Nations, multilateral and bilateral treaties, his strategy to contain and defeat inhuman communism called for the United States to champion the cause of human liberty and dignity. Regarding Israel, again, despite the experts' opinions to the contrary, Truman applied his principled strategy to the cause of Israel. At midnight on May 14, 1948, the Jewish state proclaimed its existence. 11 minutes later, the United States announced its de facto recognition of Israel. Then on January 25, 1949, the Jewish state held its first democratic election. 4 days later, the United States announced its de jure recognition of a democratic Israel. Lagging America on May 11, 1949, the UN admitted Israel. Over time, this act has proven akin to a boa constrictor's asking a mouse to dance. For decades, the UN denied Israel admission into a regional group, and only in 2000 was Israel conditionally accepted into the Western European and others group. From 1967 to 1989, the UN General Assembly passed 429 anti-Israeli resolutions, condemned Israel 321 times, and of 131 UN Security Council resolutions adopted regarding the Arab-Israeli conflict, 88 criticized, opposed the actions of, or found against Israel's interests. In 1975, the UN General Assembly approved Resolution 3379 and branded Zionism as racism. It took 15 years for the General Assembly to repeal this abominable slander. During the 61st session alone, from 2006 to 2007, the UN General Assembly passed 22 resolutions against Israel, and the Human Rights Council passed 10 resolutions condemning Israel. By April of 2007, the new unimproved UN Human Rights Council had specifically condemned only one country: Israel. While other countries with severe UN-documented human rights abuses like Sudan were merely advised of the body's, quote, deep concern. And the Council will entertain more resolutions against Israel in the future. Evidently, in the UN's diplomatic dance, the boa constrictor is determined to lead. Let us then suggest a tune. Bob Dylan's ironically titled song about Israel, Neighborhood Bully, which decries the UN's bias and double standard toward the democratic Jewish state. Quote, "Well, the chances are against it and the odds are slim that he'll live by the rules that the world makes for him, because there's a noose at his neck and a gun at his back, and a license to kill him is given out to every maniac." On this note, it is revealing how the UN Human Rights Council's pathetic descent into moral perversity has mirrored the United Nations' squalid devolution into venality. For global altruists afflicted with cognitive dissonance, In a likely futile effort, let us remind them of the UN's recent execrable acts against human dignity and liberty that it was created to defend. The UN's, quote, humanitarian, unquote, aid program, Oil for Food, provided little bread for Iraqis but large bribes for Saddam Hussein, his regime, UN cronies, and likely terrorists. Saddam's dictatorship siphoned $10 billion from the program through oil smuggling and systemic thievery and illegal payments and kickbacks from international contractors, all beneath the non-judgmental gaze of UN bureaucrats who were nevertheless judged culpable for gross incompetence, mismanagement, and potentially complicity with Saddam in perpetrating the biggest corruption scandal in human history. Secondly, widespread instances and allegations of the sexual exploitation and abuse of Congolese women, girls, and boys were leveled against the UN personnel sent to protect them. The particulars of this barbaric sexual abuse are unfit for this forum. Thirdly, the UN's waste, fraud, and malfeasance has turned tawdry graft into a global art, an epic debacle of avarice less worthy of a journalist than a satirist. As one UN peacekeeping staffer has informed the Interpress Service news agency, quote, corruption and kickbacks were taken for granted in most overseas operations, end quote. Though they were not taken for granted in a New York federal court, where on June 7th, the former top UN procurement official, Sanjay Bahal, was convicted of steering $100 million worth of UN peacekeeping contracts to the family of a personal friend. UN officials refused to explain how Bahal was twice exonerated by its internal investigations, while a New York jury convicted him of fraud and corruption in half a day. These are not the acts of the UN envisioned by President Franklin Roosevelt in his March 1, 1945 address before Congress on the Yalta Conference. Quoting President Roosevelt, a common ground for peace ought to spell the end of the system of unilateral action, the exclusive alliances, the spheres of influence, the balance of power, and all other expedients that have been tried for centuries and have always failed. We propose to substitute for all these a universal organization in which all peace-loving nations will finally have a chance to join, end quote. Weighed against Roosevelt's words, the UN is deemed wanting, and the reason is revealed. A universal organization will include peace-loving nations and tyrannical regimes. Consequently, all of the exclusive alliances, spheres of influence, balances of power, and all other expedients which occurred and failed for centuries outside of a universal organization have now occurred and failed this century inside the UN. Unlike Roosevelt, Truman viewed the UN as a future hope, not an immediate panacea. Though personally honest, Truman was versed in boss Tom Pendergast's political machine, and so understood the UN's membership's math boded ill for free people. Today, according to Freedom House, of 192 UN member states, 89 are, quote, fully free, and 103 are not. Thus, a solid majority of member states know liberty directly threatens their survival, which requires the suppression of their own peoples, and through their UN membership, the entire human community. While it is said words cannot hurt, the Majority Rule General Assembly's resolutions and speeches can and do hurt free peoples, as Claudia Rosette poignantly observes. Quote, what may appear to an American audience as irrelevant and even tedious theater is anything but harmless. The speeches on that UN stage are not, as a rule, meant for Americans, nor even for the multilateral audience in the chamber. Especially among repressive regimes, they are beamed to home countries and regional neighbors as evidence of the dignity and respect enjoyed by these governments at the world's leading conclave of nations. They feature as one more blow to the courageous Burmese monks, the hungry North Koreans, the desperate opposition in Zimbabwe, and the Democrats who risk prison when they raise their voices in places such as Syria and Iran, end quote. This holds true at the UN Security Council and at its Human Rights Council, from which a few bitter vignettes paint an abhorrent portrait. The UN's Permanent Security Council includes a nuclear-armed communist China and an increasingly authoritarian Russia. Their unsettling synergy of interests and actions on this body ominously echoes the height of their Cold War cooperation. Consider, despite over a decade of U.S. protestations, communist China and Putin's Russia are the top exporters of nuclear technology, chemical weapons precursors, and guided missiles to Iran. In 2004, the U.S.-China Security and Commission Review declared, quote, Chinese entities continue to assist Iran with dual-use missile-related items, raw materials, and chemical weapons-related production equipment and technology, end quote. And further noted these transfers took place after the Communist Chinese government's 2003 pledge to withhold missile technology from the Iranian regime. Looking at the UN Human Rights Council, some members are more suited to a rogues gallery than a roster of righteous nations.